Today we are going to be looking at seam finishes. I have pieces of muslin fabric, calico. Okay, so this is just to show you what we'll be doing with certain stitching and um, finishes for your seams. So now I'm going to start by making a seam guide with my masking tape. So I want to make 1 inch seams with the piece of fabric I have. So I'm just going to take a piece of this and place it after the 1 inch marking. So what this is going to do for me is to help me guide the edge of the seam so that we're sewing a 1 inch seam on a straight line. So we're starting from the top here. I'm going to be using black thread so that you can see the stitches. So I back stitch and then I continue on this edge. So the masking tape there is guiding the edge of the seam. Yeah, just like that. And then once I get to the end, I'm going to do a back stitch to lock up my stitches, and that is it. So I'm going to take this off and cut. So we have a seam like you would have um, after sewing on your seam line. So what we normally would do is use a serger or an overlocker to finish up the edges, but sometimes you may want to try other options. There are several other options we can use. I'm just going to trim this off. So we're using the bias bound method for this. I'm going to show you other ones, but we're starting with the bias bound method. So I'm going to take my time to trim off the edges of this so that we would have a neater seam finishing. So we need to note that for your seam edges to be on this side, it means this is the wrong side of the fabric. Wrong side, okay? And this is the right side. But most of this is on the other side of the fabric. So I'm going to sew this. So this is what your bias trimming would look like. Okay, so I'm going to take this and fold it neatly like that over the seam. So we're starting from the back to the front. It's like the wrong side to the right side, and I'm going to fold over and sew. So you want to fit this to the machine. I'm going to take the first stitches to hold that in place so I can make sure this is properly folded in. Okay, so you want it in the middle so that when you sew, you're sewing neatly on both sides of your bias binding. Okay, so I'm going to do a back stitch. So everything, this is about to eat up my fabric. Okay, good, we got it. So I'm doing a back stitch and then we'll sew. So I'm folded this all the way so that we have um, a longer length to sew through. So I'm going to round this. So I back stitch at the end, and then I can take this off. So the first part is done. I can cut off the rest of the bias binding. Okay, so if you can see, sorry, there's a buildup of thread around here, but this is what you are to have. So this finishing can be used on jackets. For instance, if you're making like a casual jacket and you don't want it lined, you can use this finishing on it. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other side so that you see. So I'm taking from the back. So we're doing, this is like the right side of the fabric, okay? So usually I like to go from wrong side to right side. So even your seams have, your seam allowances have wrong sides and right side. So I'm going to fold it over like that and then feed it here. And make sure we have it together like that. So I can start my sewing. Okay, I backstitch. Fine. Then we can fold under and over like that. Okay. So always make sure you follow the stitching all the way down so everything is neatly captured in. Yep, just like that. Okay, beautiful. So I'm done. I backstitch and I can take this off. So I can cut this off now. Okay, so that is it. Okay, so you can, normally you would want to do this in same color fabric, unless, I think this looks beautiful like that, unless you purposely want to like add some other color just to add a bit of twists here and there. But this is what your bias bound finishing, seam finishing would look like on the inside of the garment. So you just need to sew it once and it captures both sides neatly. So here I have another piece of cloth with my 1-inch seam. So we're doing another type of bias binding. So this is, for instance, in a situation where you're going to use the same fabric to fold over your seam. So I have a piece of cloth here. You cut 1.5 inches by the length of the seam you want to sew on. So I have 2 of these for both sides. So now you can use, depending on the garment or the project you're doing, you can use one piece to bind the two together, or you can separate them. So I'm going to separate them for you to see now. So like I said before, the parts where your seam allowance is sticking out from is the wrong side of the fabric. So this is our wrong side again. So in this case, I'm going to raise it up and start from the back. So I'm going to sew from back to front. What we're trying to achieve here is to sew the self-made bias binding from the back to the front. We're sewing a 1/4 inch seam all the way down. You back stitch, Now you just pull it out and then trim off any excess if you have from the self-made bias binding. At this point, you're going to fold the edge of the bias binding to the inner side. So we're folding a 1/4 inch from the edge again. You can steam press. There is a way I like to do it. I can fold with my hands and then I use a scissors or and just an object I can use to press the fabric. Now it's easy to do this with a cotton fabric or something like linen, because those fabric can easily just fold over and stay, but not all fabrics can stay when you press them like that. So you have a 1/4 inch seam on one side of the bias binding fabric. Then you're going to fold that over the rough edge of the seam. And when you do this, you make sure you have an equal fold over the other side, over the right side. So I like to hold in place with a pin, because you're working with a small fold of fabric. You fold over and secure with your pins. Those pins are going to be taken off when after this part has been sewn. Make sure the first stitch from the back is properly covered. What you do here is you simply sew over the right side. Now sew all the way down. As you sew, you take off the pins so that they don't obstruct the stitches. You need a neat stitches sewn all the way down to finish this up. We're going to repeat this process on the other side. So you're going to place the self-made bias binding wrong sides, and then you sew a 1/4 inch all the way down. And then you back stitch. Just exact same thing we did on the other side. Trim your threads, cut off any excess fabrics that is left, then fold over, steam press, or you glide the head of your scissors over. Don't forget to also fold the edge of the fabric, the self-made bias binding, a 1/4 inch also. So I'm just checking here to see that my measurement is correct, and then make sure you give it a good press, and then you fold over again. When you fold over a second time like that, you may want to steam press it. But like I said, this fabric is easier to work because it stays in place when you fold. So what we do here is we secure with pins again, and then you begin to sew. As you begin to sew, you can begin to take off the pin so that it doesn't obstruct the stitches. Your back stitch, and then sew all the way down. As you sew, remember to still take off the pins. You need to try as much as possible to make sure your stitches are neat and straight as you do this. When you get to the end, your back stitch, and that is it. So at this point, both sides of the seams have been covered. So this is what it looks like when you make your own bias binding. It's usually easier, especially when you're working with a fabric and you want to maintain the same color with your binding as the fabric you're working with. And then on this other side, of course, you can see we used a plain bias binding that was bought from a fabric store. So whichever you decide to use for whichever sewing project you're working on is all up to you. This gives you a neat finishing, whether you're making a jacket without seams or a blouse, and it also works very well for thick lace fabrics that you know will be difficult to do overlocking with, or use your sergers for. So that is it for today. I'll bring you other kinds of seam finishes. I hope you have fun working with this. Bye.